welcome to News Inside. I'm An Jung-hyun. Let's welcome back our panelists, Professor Kim Sang-hyuk, good to see you again, and Dr. Bong Young-sik. Thanks for coming back. Now let's first take a look at our topic of discussion for the week.
지금부터 정부는 북한 정권이 핵 개발로는 생존할 수 없으며 오히려 체제 붕괴를 재촉할 뿐이라는 사실을 뼈저리게 깨닫고 스스로 변화할 수밖에 없는 환경을 만들기 위해 보다 강력하고 실효적인 조치들을 취해 나갈 것입니다. 이 과정에 우리는 동맹국인 미국과의 공조는 물론 한미일 3국 간 협력도 강화해 나갈 것입니다. 중국과 러시아와의 연대도 계속 중시해 나갈 것입니다. 지금 정부는 확고한 군 대비태세 확립과 함께 사이버 공격, 다중시설 테러 등의 비군사적 도발에도 철저하게 대비하고 있습니다. 강력한 대북 억제력을 유지하기 위해 한미 연합 방위력을 증강시키고 한미 동맹의 미사일 방어 태세 향상을 위한 협의도 진행하고 있습니다.
Earlier this week, President Park Geun-hye spoke to the National Assembly about inter-Korean relations on the heels of North Korea's rocket launch and the shutdown of the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Now, this was the first time she addressed the public since North Korea's fourth nuclear test on January 6th. It's rather unusual that she chose to speak at the National Assembly. What do you think she was trying to achieve by giving her speech there at this juncture?
After the fourth nuclear test on January 6th, and this month they launched long-range missiles. And after these are the events of the North Korea, South Korean government decided to close the Kaesong Industrial Complex. What does this mean to us? I mean, actually, this means the big change of the South Korean government policy towards North Korea. And that it was made very sudden and without notice. So I think on the part of the Korean government, they needed to explain why and how they made such a decision. And particularly to maximize, to make the message clear, take more effective way to explain why and how they changed their policy towards North Korea. President Park Geun-hye decided to give a speech at National Assembly rather than the Blue House or other places. This means why? Because National Assembly is the place where the representatives of the Korean people gather together and discuss about national benefits. So I think by giving a speech at National Assembly, President Park Geun-hye could make it clear, give her a message to the people why and how they changed their policy towards North Korea. And symbolically, by giving a speech at National Assembly, that was not a decision only made by the Korean government. It is a decision made by the government as well as the Korean people, I think.
So what were some notable points from her speech?
Well, basically, she declared that time is now moved back to the time of the Cold War. At least the time prior to June 2000, when there was first ever inter-Korean summit taken place in Pyongyang. So basically it is about the death of sunshine policy or any type of engagement policy toward North Korea as a viable means to bring about the ultimate goal of nuclear-free Korean Peninsula. So it is notable that she did not use the word dialogue even once in the entire speech. So regime change was clearly declared by President Park as the most important and reliable solution to the nuclear problem on the Korean Peninsula. And it was a very emotional speech. She mentioned the closure of Kaesong Industrial Complex and other hardline policy options that are going to be taken by the Korean government. And she added that these measures are just beginning, not the end.
So Seoul has taken one of its strongest stances to date against North Korea. How effective do you think this will be?
Well, we have to wait. Actually, it's too early to say how effective it will be. But one thing which have to concern is about how much the cooperation we can draw from the China and Russia, because as we discussed already, several weeks ago, well, economic sanction on the North Korea, well, to maximize the effects of these policy measures, we need the cooperation with China and Russia. I think in the same context, to make the North Korea realize their nuclear ambition will result only in the speeding up collapse of its regime. I think to make this message clearer, definitely we need the cooperation with the China and Russian side.
What do you think, Dr. Bong? What is the key to implementing this hardline policy?
Well, key to implement this hardline policy is the resolve of Korean government and its people. Thankfully, the public opinion survey coming immediately after she delivered a speech at the National Assembly seems to be very strongly supportive for the government's position. But nonetheless, it is a very important question whether South Korean public and their government are indeed ready to absorb the prospective cost of these hardline policies, because North Korea is likely to very belligerently responding to these policies, and it'll be a source of great deal of anxiety and controversy in domestic politics. And speaking of the question whether South Korean government and its military are really ready to continue these hardline policies all the way until the policies will have achieved its ultimate goal, which is nuclear-free North Korea and potentially regime change inside North Korea. I have my own doubts, because the Korean military just agreed to postpone the scheduled transfer of wartime operational control, which was scheduled to be completed in 2015, until South Korean military will have achieved the necessary capability to deal with military threats from North Korea. In the absence of South Korean military's own independent capability to deal with North Korean military threat, which is not only limited to nuclear weapons, but many other different kinds of threats, including cyber attacks, then we have to wait and see how the resolve expressed by the Park Geun-hye administration will be actually translated into consistent practice of strong defense and hardline policy to put consistent pressure on North Korean regime.
Following North Korea's long-range rocket launch, the South unleashed a hardline response, announcing it would shut down the inter-Korean Kaesong Industrial Park. One day later, the North, in a surprise move, expelled all South Korean workers and designated the complex a military-controlled area. In order to minimize losses of South Korean companies operating out of the park, Seoul rolled out a set of support measures and said it would cover up to 90% of investment costs that went into the complex. Meanwhile, with the shuttering of Kaesong, some have pointed out the North may re-establish a military base that was closed for the industrial park. South Korean soldiers are on standby for any unexpected provocations. The total sum of investment from the South Korean government and private companies in Kaesong amounts to roughly $820 million. Pulling the plug on that is said to reflect just how determined the South is to step up pressure against the North. We look at inter-Korean relations and where things are headed following the Kaesong shutdown.
Last week, we saw the Kaesong Industrial Park, the longest-standing symbol of inter-Korean cooperation, grind to a halt. This effectively suspended all projects between the South and North. Seoul says the decision was inevitable, and it's now looking for ways to minimize the damage. Now, on the day that South Korean companies started to pull out of the complex, North Korea abruptly announced it would expel all South Korean employees and freeze South Korean assets. What is Pyongyang's intention here?
Well, I would highlight three possible intentions of the North Korean government for this swift reaction to the decision by Park Geun-hye administration. One is to create, kind of internal divisions and fights within South Korean public. There is an outcry by the company owners about the prospective business loss, and they would blame Park Geun-hye administration for failing to promptly and adequately inform them about this decision. So it was intended to put a kind of a seed of internal division among South Koreans. Second intention, I think, was to demonstrate that North Korean government is not afraid of the pressure imposed by the outside world, including South Korean government, because it had a very bitter memory of kind of succumbing to the pressure imposed by Park Geun-hye administration. One example was in 2013 when it unilaterally declared a temporary suspension of Kaesong Industrial Complex, but Park Geun-hye administration did not budge, and it was actually the Kim Jong-un government to kind of succumb to the pressure and put things back to the normal situation. And last August, when it created the provocation with the mines at the DMZ, then it had to make a compromise, very difficult compromise with the Park Geun-hye administration in order to stop the operation of the loudspeaker psychological campaign. So I think Kim Jong government was kind of telling itself that this time we wouldn't budge, we would go all the way. And third and last intention was toward China. Basically, by escalating the tension after the missile test and South Korea's response to close the Kaesong Industrial Complex, basically Kim Jong-un is challenging China, whether China wants to keep the stability and peace on the Korean Peninsula, or China will move along with other countries to punish North Korea.
Well, experts at this point are predicting a permanent shutdown is likely for the Kaesong Industrial Park. In the meantime, though, does the North have any legal basis for something like an asset freeze?
No, not at all. As you know very well, in fact, just after one day, when the North Korean government decided freeze their own South Korean assets in North Korea, and then they decided to expel the Korean staff and workers from Kaesong Industrial Complex. But Minister Hong, the Minister of Unification, expressed his regrets for the decision made by North Koreans. And he also emphasized that there was no legal basis for those kind of decisions. Well, we have the Inter-Korean Basic Agreement. I think this is the backbone, the agreement explaining all the relations between North and South Korea. Even this agreement does not include any articles about one side decide to something not acceptable. This agreement does not say anything what kind of punishment the other side can give the another one. I think this means that, well, as a whole, to answer your question, there is no legal basis for those kind of the actions made by North Koreans. Well, considering the volume, over the last decades, the South Koreans has invested about the $1 billion, which is a huge amount of money, in fact. Well, I think considering the volume which they freeze in North Korea, I think the situation can be solved quite easily, unexpectedly. But when you look at the reality we face, certainly it will take a time. Or in some sense, it will be very, very difficult to find a way to restore the relationship between two Koreas, I think.
So in reality, there's no way to bind the North to previous agreements or punish it for reneging on them.
Well, it goes back to Professor Shin's previous comment last time that North Korean government is basically shooting at its own foot by simply ignoring the legal basis of this joint venture. Then it is a clear signal to other potential suitors who might be interested in taking over the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Because the matter of fact on the ground is that it is huge investment in the excess of, as you mentioned, $1 billion US dollars.
Yes.
So it might be a very attractive takeover opportunity for foreign companies. But when your property rights are not guaranteed, then who would want to do business inside North Korea?
Well, speaking of potential suitors, what do you think North Korea will do with the Kaesong complex?
Well, one option is to seek for potential suitors outside the Northeast Asia. That's one option. Although I would concur with Professor Shin that the prospect of success is very minimal. And second option, which I think is more likely, is for North Korean government to just let the People's Armed Forces to convert the industrial complex into the military base as it was before the construction of the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Because it was never an easy or popular decision by previous leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-il, father of current leader Kim Jong-un, to convert the Kaesong Industrial Complex, because it was a very important strategic post for the armed forces of North Korea. Kaesong is in a proximity to the capital city of Seoul. So it carries enormous strategic values for the North Korean armed forces. And without the continual supply of electricity from South Korea, the entire factory inside the complex has to be gone within a few months.
So the factory park, as we know, is closed, but the two Koreas still have outstanding payments that need to be settled. How much do they amount to, and will the two sides be able to work out a settlement?
The money which South Korea should get from North Korea is about the $3 billion US, including $2 billion loan provided by South Korean government to North Korean government. Well, in fact, if I do explain about the details of the $2 billion loans which we provide North Korea, it included $933 million loans for food and raw materials. And we also provided about $1.15 billion US for the water reactor construction. And besides that, it includes about interests of the loans we provide to North Koreans. So it will be, as I said before, $3 billion US, a huge amount of money. Then how about the money? How much money we have to pay back to North Korea? It is about the $100 million. So it's really peanut comparing the volume we have to get the money from North Korea. Well, in fact, this money included the salaries which South Korean enterprises should pay to the North Korean workers. And also it included the retirement pay for the North Korean workers. Actually, this is one of the arguing points, because the North Korean government very recently changed the regulation about the retirement pay. It means that according to the original agreement, when the workers were fired by the employers, they are entitled to get the retirement pay. But according to the North Korea, they changed it without consent of the South Korean counterparts. They said that regardless of whether they were fired by the employers or they voluntarily quit the job, they should are entitled to get the sovereign pay. So I think, but including those kind of things, totally is about $100 million. So there are big differences.
So seeing that there is such a huge difference between what we owe and what we are owed, North Korea is unlikely to come to the negotiating table.
Definitely no, I think.
But isn't there a possibility the North Korean government would covet that $100 million and come to the negotiation table to retrieve that money? There's a saying that compliment can make a whales dance, and the money may be able to make North Korean government dance.
Without North Korea having to pay us back.
No. That's not like North Korea.
Right.
But one thing, this is very interesting, but I think the North Korean regime seemed to so-called priority and put the first priority on the self-pride, something like that, our dignity. I think without the tangible benefits from the negotiations about this, this deal, I think the possibility to see the return of North Koreans to the negotiation table is very minimal, I think.
In the meantime, the U.S. Congress passed a bill to broaden sanctions against North Korea in an effort to cut off funds used for weapons development and other illicit activities. This is the first time that a sanctions bill exclusively targeting North Korea has been passed by both the House and the Senate.
By cutting off Kim Jong-un's access to the hard currency he needs for his army and his weapons, H.R. 757 will return us to the one strategy that has worked: financial pressure on the North Korean regime.
So all eyes are now on whether these measures will actually work in cutting off funds for the North. What do you think?
What I think about it depends upon what kind of criterion we are going to apply to assess the effectiveness of these resolutions passed in the U.S. Congress. It will be effective in terms of hurting North Korean regime. It will bite where it hurts because it is the first official bipartisan resolution passed in the U.S. Congress, especially focused on North Korean nuclear issue, not as a derivative of the Patriot Act or other foreign policy tools. So it has a clear focus on North Korea, and it contains the measures that will punish foreign entities and individuals in terms of secondary boycott, which conduct business with North Korean government and its citizens. So in terms of content, it has all the important ingredients to be effective. But if we apply a higher criterion, whether it'll be effective in terms of kneeling down Kim Jong-un government to make it abandon nuclear and missile ambitions, I have my own suspicion, because you need to have China on board for these measures, which is based upon the imposition of secondary boycott to be actually working. Because 90% of North Korea's entire trade is conducted with Chinese companies and Chinese individuals. And the North Korean government learned its lessons after the Bangkok Delta Asia incident many years ago. So it created a lot of smart ways to hide the actual identity of the bank accounts and use the forgery identities of Chinese companies to hide the actual business with other countries. So it'll be very difficult for the administration in the United States to actually go after the actual source of these financial transactions that it would be tied to the WMD activities of North Korea.
As President Park Geun-hye alluded to in her speech, the foreign currency that went into Kaesong is believed to have been funneled into the North Korean leadership, i.e. the Kim Jong-un regime. Tell us how North Korea secures capital for its various projects.
Yes, in case of the Kaesong Industrial Complex, there are 54,700 workers. And the average salary for the North Korean workers was about $160 per month. A salary was not given to each individual workers. The money sent to the North Korean government, well, actually the offices in dealing with the Kaesong Industrial Complex, and they just gave about the $30 per month to the North Korean workers, which means that about $130 roughly, $20, $30 per person the North Korean government could get. So we can easily guess that this money was spent for their own political purposes or for the other, the purposes. So this is the kind of some broad explanation the South Korean government has explained over the last several days.
Plus, there are some illicit activities that the U.S. sanctions bill specifies, such as money laundering or drug trafficking, which have been pointed out as sources of cash for North Korea.
Yeah, I think definitely North Korean diplomats have been quite notorious about the drug smuggling or some. Even from Cuba, they illegally imported the cigars, and so it's like illegal transactions made by the North Korean diplomat. It has been one of the major sources for the North Koreans, sources of the foreign currencies for North Koreans. I think these kind of North Korean behaviors have been monitored by the international organizations. I think the rooms which North Koreans will be able to use this kind of way for their, to getting their foreign currencies would be getting more difficulties as time goes on, because that everybody is watching the North Koreans' behavior, and so I think the North Korea will face another more serious difficulties than before, I think.
So now the U.S. has an independent set of fresh sanctions against the North. South Korea has pulled the plug on Kaesong. Japan has expanded restrictions on travel and remittances.
Yes.
China is still missing from the picture. Can we expect these measures to work in the absence of concrete actions from Beijing?
We have to give ourselves time to watch how China will be evolving. Yes, closure of Kaesong Industrial Complex was an extremely difficult and controversial decision by the South Korean government, but at the same time extremely important and necessary. South Korean government want to make a clear message to China and Russia and demand these countries to be really serious about coping with the nuclear threat from North Korea. South Korea itself needs to demonstrate its seriousness. So closure of the Kaesong Industrial Complex was the necessary step to demonstrate this resolve.
A recent survey asked people how South Korea should deal with the North. Over 30% of the respondents expressed support for harsher sanctions. 18% said military action must be taken to destroy North Korea's nuclear facilities. But that's about 49% calling for a more hardline stance. On the other hand, we had about 40% saying the two Koreas should sit down and talk, and just under 8% saying the South should simply recognize the North as a nuclear state. So altogether, that's about half and half on either side of the spectrum. Let's talk about the hardline approach first. As we just saw, some people want to see military action, with a small portion of them even going so far as to argue that South Korea needs nuclear weapons as well. What are your thoughts?
Personally, I'm against that idea because, our denuclearization has been chosen as the a policy taken by the both Koreans. So South Korea was free nuclear weapons at the time, so-called strategic nuclear weapons possessed by the U.S. Seoul USR Army. They withdrew the strategic nuclear weapons from the Korean Peninsula. Why? Because that the nuclear bomb can be a fatal blow against the South Korea as well as North Korea. But when you look at the reality, North Korea, I think I'm very carefully say they have nuclear bombs that we don't have. So I think for us, it's a matter of life and death. If they attack us, what can you do? So we are talking about THAAD and then our missile defense system, blah, blah, blah. But we don't have, that is the fact, we don't have the effective missile defense system. So I think at this moment, we should discuss seriously about the redeployment of the strategic weapons. What it requires long and then maybe sincere discussions with USA. We had persuade them. This can be one option, I think, which we can consider. The another one is actually the Japanese, the policy can be one of the good reference for us. Japanese government have a huge amount of plutonium which can be used for the production of nuclear bombs. They have enough technology required to production of nuclear bombs. We don't have the technology. I don't know very well, but I think we don't have the technology, high technology enough to make the nuclear bomb immediately. But the fact is that we don't have plutonium which Japanese has. So we have to maybe, I think, consider to have some plutonium, which means that we can shorten the time needed for the production of nuclear bombs just in case. So I think this can be two options we can think about looking at the reality we are facing these days.
As for the Kaesong shutdown, it is said to have been inspired by the Iran sanctions model. What similarities do we see?
Not much, unfortunately, because Iran and North Korea are like apple and orange. You have to have a certain conditions for economic sanctions to work. And the conditions that made the economic sanctions on Iran work are actually absent in case of North Korea. For instance, Iran is critically dependent upon international trade, especially the oil revenue generated from the international trade. But North Korea is not really closely tied to international trade. So leverage upon North Korean economy is not so significant in terms of effectiveness of economic sanctions. And second, there should be a regime accountable for and responsive to the public opinion. Iran is not the most exemplary democracy on the face of the world, but it has general elections and the leadership change is always possible. So when the Iranian public was hit hard by the effect of economic sanctions with rapidly rising inflation, then the political leadership of Iran needed to deal with this public outcry in order to maintain the regime stability. But Kim Jong-un regime in North Korea is like the head of the theocratic system. So public pressure on the leadership for change of behavior is not really possible in case of North Korea. And North Korean regime can easily transfer the workers who used to work at Kaesong Industrial Complex to other working opportunities outside North Korea in China and Russia, so that the revenue loss created by the economic sanctions could be rather easily compensated for by this action. Lastly, China, I repeatedly mentioned the role of China, but China holds the key, which is accountable for 90% of North Korean trade and the significant level of energy dependence of North Korean economy. If China does not get on board for economic sanctions, there will be always huge hole left that will just allow North Korean leadership to continue to survive.
Nevertheless, Cheong-won is said to be closely studying the Iranian case.
Right. But there is a significant difference. Although we have to turn every stone in order to learn from other examples and find the most optimal solutions to our own issue with North Korea. But when you compare these two cases head to head, then there are far more differences and gaps than similarities.
So, do you see North Korea reopening talks with Seoul anytime soon? Where do you see inter-Korean relations going from here on out?
Well, as Dr. Bong explained it very well, I think China is taking the driver's seat in this issue. I think, regardless of the North Korea's intention, to make a long story short, I think Chinese influence decision will give the huge influences over the future Chinese and North Korea's government stance, which means that China, when they get on the board about the efforts to isolate or punish North Korean regime, well, North Korean government cannot have any other alternatives to get back to the negotiation table, because North Korea, what kind of the sources of income they have, I think are relatively very, very poor. So I think depending on the Chinese government decision about the sanctions against North Korea, I think the time when we meet North Korea as at the negotiation table will be decided, I think.
Well, I'd like to raise my hope on North Korean government possibly proposing dialogue and negotiation
Yes.
sometime in a few months, because one, the North Korean government I know covets money, and think about it, the North Korean government vehemently protested the United States government going after its savings in the Bangko Delta Asia, which was, only 25 million US dollars. Think about how well our proud baseball players in the major league get paid.
Right.
Not only the amount of money is important in the eyes of North Korean leadership, but it's clean money. It's clean, legitimate hard currency, not generated from illicit activities such as missile export or narcotic trade. So it is clean money, very important for the leadership's own personal disposals. So in order to retrieve the backlog, the salaries of North Korean workers in the amount of 100 million US dollars, North Korean leadership may propose a dialogue, only focus on the issue.
Can I add one thing more?
Sure.
I think already discussed about this one 2 weeks ago, I think. Well, 547 North Korean workers have had a chance to taste so-called capitalism. And then when we include the family members of these North Korean workers, about 200,000 North Koreans have tasted so-called capitalism. I think this is a very important thing. Once they taste the capitalism, I think it will be very difficult for North Korean government to let them isolate from the rest of the North Koreans. I think this can be one of the burdens on the North Korean regime. So I think this can be one of the reasons push them to go to the negotiation table with South Korea, I think.
In the meantime, around us, there are conflicting interests. The U.S., Japan, China, Russia all brought up the issue of Kaesong after North Korea's provocations. Seoul responded by shutting it down. But Russia is now voicing its opposition to Washington's new legislation, while China is expressing its discomfort with THAAD deployment on the Korean Peninsula. With all these different interests, how can the related parties work together to hold North Korea now accountable for its actions?
Well, the most important thing for all the related parties, including China and Russia, is to keep their eyes on the ultimate purpose, which is to eliminate nuclear capability of North Korea. Anything else will be secondary considerations for international cooperation. And the major concern for China and Russia for going after nuclear North Korea is that North Korea provocation have been good excuse, quote unquote, excuse for the United States and its security partners to convert their alliance of partnerships as a regional security cooperation system, which pose a direct threat to these two countries, something reminiscent of the Cold War. But unless these countries will get on board with other countries to seriously deal with growing threat of North Korea with its nuclear and missile capability, then augmenting the level of security cooperation with the United States and its Asian allies is only natural consequences. It needs to put the responsibility and blame on North Korea as a provider of this unfortunate situation. So it is very interesting description by both sides, the South Korean Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs and his counterpart, Mr. Jang Ye-shui, in the 7th Vice Ministerial strategic dialogue had a, quote, a very deep, frank, and constructive dialogue on wide range of issues, including North Korea's nuclear and missile provocations and the potential introduction of THAAD system to South Korea, meaning that they are still miles apart, miles apart. When diplomats say that they have a very deep, frank, and constructive conversation, that's not a good news. So it'll take some time for China and Russia to get closer to the strategic assessment that is widely shared among the United States, South Korea, and Japan.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today. As we close, if you could tell us briefly what we should take away from our discussion.
Well, after the President Park Geun-hye's speech at National Assembly, when I look at the responses from the political parties, I think this is time for us. All politicians should put the first priorities on national interest rather than their political interests. I want to emphasize this one to all politicians.
A message to the politicians out there. Dr. Bong?
While watching President Park delivering the speech, I saw her extremely angry, which is a good reflection of how the general public felt about what had happened because of North Korea. But this is time that cool head should prevail over emotions. I recall a quote from the movie Godfather Part 3. The Michael Corleone warns his disciple, saying that, do not hate your enemy. Do not hate your enemy. It affects your judgment. I think this quote can be helpful for Park Geun-hye administration.
Thank you both very much once again. And that is all for this edition of News Inside. Thank you for watching. We'll see you again next week.